Welcome back to Stories of Slavery. Today, we're heading back to 1862, to the astonishing story of two black twins who were labeled gifted after a battery of tests left even the most seasoned observers completely baffled. But it wasn't just their abilities that made them famous. It was the impossible secret hidden behind those results, something that was never supposed to be recorded. This is a heavy story, an intense one. So take a breath, and listen closely. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and drop a comment letting me know which city and country you're tuning in from. Your support is what keeps these stories alive, instead of buried. Let's begin. On the morning of September 14, 1862, in a quiet fishing village called Marblehead on the Massachusetts coast, two black children sat across from a white doctor who had traveled nearly 40 miles from Boston just to see them. His name was Dr. Nathaniel Warren. He was 53 years old, and had devoted his entire career to studying the human mind at Harvard Medical School. He had examined hundreds of patients. He had published papers in medical journals across America and Europe. He had witnessed things most people would never believe. But he had never seen anything like the Carter twins. They were 8 years old. Their names were Elijah and Ruth. They sat perfectly still in their wooden chairs, hands folded in their laps, their dark eyes fixed on the doctor with an intensity that made him shift in his seat. They didn't fidget. They didn't look away. They just watched, like they were the ones running the examination. Dr. Warren opened his leather bag and pulled out a set of cards. Each one held a different math problem, arranged in order of increasing difficulty, all designed by him. The first cards were simple addition. The last ones contained calculations that would stump most university professors without pen and paper. He handed the first card to Elijah. "Tell me the answer," Dr. Warren said. Elijah glanced at it for maybe half a second. 23, correct. He handed him the second. Elijah answered before the doctor's hand had fully moved away. 57, correct again. They moved through the cards. Addition turned to subtraction, subtraction to multiplication, multiplication to division, then on to multi-step problems that would take most people minutes to untangle. Elijah answered every single one. No pause. No hesitation. No mistakes. When they reached the final card, one that had taken Dr. Warren himself nearly 3 minutes to solve when he created it, Elijah looked at the numbers for maybe 2 seconds. 439. Dr. Warren just stared at him. He checked his answer key. Then he checked it again. "That is correct," he said, his voice almost a whisper. Then he turned to Ruth and pulled out a different set of materials. These weren't math problems. They were pages of text from books he'd chosen because no child would be familiar with them. One was from a Latin medical textbook. Another was a legal document full of old-fashioned language. A third came from a philosophical essay with vocabulary far beyond what any 8-year-old should know. He handed her the Latin text. "Read this." Ruth looked at the page. She didn't know Latin. She'd never studied it. She'd never even seen it before. But something happened as she looked at the words. Slowly at first, then with growing confidence, she began to sound them out. Her pronunciation wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough to follow. And even more remarkable, after each sentence, she paused and offered a guess at what it might mean, based on the patterns she was noticing. Several of her guesses were right. Dr. Warren leaned back. His hands were shaking. In 30 years of medicine, he'd never witnessed anything like this. He'd heard rumors of children with extraordinary minds, but he'd always dismissed them as exaggerations or frauds. This was neither. He looked at the twins' mother, a woman named Sarah Carter, who stood quietly in the corner, watching with an expression that mixed pride with fear. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "how long have your children been able to do these things?" Sarah Carter was 31 years old. Born free in Massachusetts, she was the daughter of a black sailor and a Native American woman. She had worked most of her life as a domestic servant, cleaning houses and washing clothes for white families who paid her barely enough to survive. She'd known her children were different since they were 3. That was when Elijah started counting everything, adding and multiplying numbers from daily life, solving sums she couldn't even verify herself. That was when Ruth began memorizing entire books after hearing them read aloud just once, reciting passages word for word weeks or even months later. Sarah had tried to hide their abilities. She understood, in a way no white person ever could, how dangerous it was for black children to appear too intelligent in America. In 1862, the country was at war. The Civil War had started in April 1861, and now, 18 months later, it showed no signs of stopping. President Lincoln hadn't yet issued the Emancipation Proclamation. In the South, 4 million black people remained enslaved. In the North, free black people lived on borrowed time, tolerated but not accepted, free but not equal. A black child who could read was dangerous. A black child who could outthink white adults was unthinkable. For 5 years, Sarah kept their abilities hidden. She told them over and over, "Don't show what you can do. Act ordinary. Hide your gifts." But secrets always find a way out. 3 weeks before Dr. Warren's visit, a white merchant named Thomas Aldrich had come to Sarah's house to deliver fabric she'd ordered for sewing work. While she was in the back counting coins to pay him, the merchant noticed Elijah sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a newspaper someone had left behind. The merchant laughed. "Can you even read that, boy?" he asked, dripping with condescension. Elijah looked up. "Yes." Then he added, "There's an error in the 3rd paragraph. The reporter wrote that Union forces captured 300 Confederate soldiers at the Battle of Antietam. But if you calculate from the numbers earlier in the article, it should actually be 347. Thomas Aldrich stared at him. Then he picked up the paper and read the paragraph himself. He did the math. The boy was right. The merchant left without another word. But within days, the story had spread through Marblehead. The black widow's children could read. They could calculate. Their minds were impossible to explain. Dr. Warren heard about it from a colleague who heard it from a patient who heard it from a neighbor. At first, he dismissed it as gossip. But something wouldn't let go. So he made the trip to Marblehead. And now he sat across from 2 children who had just shown him things that challenged everything he thought he knew about the human brain. "Mrs. Carter," he said again, "I must know. How is this possible?" Sarah looked at her children. Then at the doctor. She knew that whatever she said next would change their lives forever. "They've always been this way," she said quietly. "Before they could walk. Before they could talk. They see things others can't. They understand things others don't. I don't know why. I don't know how. I only know it's true." Dr. Warren nodded slowly. He was already composing the letter he'd write to his colleagues at Harvard. Already imagining the studies, the papers, the lectures. He didn't see the fear in Sarah Carter's eyes. He didn't understand that he was about to make her children visible, in a world that punished black people for being seen. News of the Carter twins spread faster than Sarah ever feared. Within a week, 3 more doctors came to Marblehead. Within 2 weeks, a reporter from the Boston Evening Transcript arrived, asking questions and taking notes. Within a month, the story had run in newspapers across New England. The headlines ranged in tone. The Boston Evening Transcript called them remarkable Negro children displaying unusual mental faculties, cautiously admiring but careful not to suggest equality. The Springfield Republican went with scientific mystery, how can such minds exist in such bodies? Treating them as curiosities, specimens to study. The Providence Journal asked, nature's impossibility made manifest. Suggesting some freak anomaly that proved nothing about black capability. But there were other reactions too. The Liberator, the abolitionist newspaper published by William Lloyd Garrison in Boston, ran the twin story on the front page. Their headline read simply, "Proof of Human Equality." The article argued that the Carter twins were living evidence of what abolitionists had always claimed, that mental differences between races came from circumstance, not biology. That article changed everything. William Lloyd Garrison was one of the most famous abolitionists in America. He'd been publishing The Liberator since 1831, and his paper reached anti-slavery activists across the country and around the world. When he wrote about the Carter twins, people paid attention. Donations began arriving at Sarah's small house. Letters came from strangers who wanted to help. Offers of education came from schools and tutors willing to teach the children for free. Invitations arrived from churches and lecture halls wanting them to appear. But other things arrived too. Threats came in the mail. Anonymous letters warned Sarah that her children would be harmed if they kept attracting attention. Rocks were thrown through her windows at night. A dead cat was left on her doorstep with a note, "Only know your place." The people of Marblehead, who'd lived alongside Sarah for years, started treating her differently. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid her. Customers stopped hiring her for sewing or laundry. The white family she'd worked for as a domestic servant let her go, one by one, until she had nothing. Sarah understood. Her children's intelligence had upset the natural order. White people in Marblehead could tolerate a black family living nearby, as long as that family stayed inferior, dependent, subservient. But the twins' ability suggested something they couldn't accept, the possibility that black minds were equal to white minds. That possibility was more threatening than any physical danger. It challenged the whole justification for slavery. It questioned the entire structure of American society. It made white people doubt what they'd been taught since birth. And so they responded the only way they knew, by trying to destroy what they couldn't understand. In November 1862, Sarah Carter made a heartbreaking decision. She sent her children away. Dr. Warren arranged for them to enroll at the Institute for Colored Youth in Philadelphia. Founded in 1837 by a Quaker named Richard Humphreys, it was one of the few schools in America offering advanced education to black students. The school accepted Elijah and Ruth on full scholarship, with room and board paid by a wealthy abolitionist family. Sarah couldn't go with them. She had no money for the journey, no way to support herself in Philadelphia. If she left Marblehead, she'd lose everything: the tiny house she rented, the few things she owned, the fragile stability she'd fought a decade to build. So she said goodbye to her children on a cold November morning at Marblehead Harbor. She held them both close and told them things she'd never said before. "You are special," she whispered. "Not because of what you can do with your minds. You're special because you're my children. Because you're good and kind and strong. Because you've survived in a world that never wanted you to survive." She pulled back and looked at their faces, memorizing every detail. "The world will try to use you," she said. "White people will want to parade you before audiences. They'll want to study you like animals. They'll want to prove their theories about race, one way or another, using your minds as evidence." She took their hands in hers. "Don't let them. You're not evidence. You're not specimens. You're not proof of anything except your own existence. You're human beings. You deserve to be treated as human beings, and anyone who treats you as anything less doesn't deserve your cooperation." Elijah and Ruth boarded the ship to Philadelphia. They stood at the railing, watching their mother grow smaller and smaller until she disappeared. They didn't cry. They'd learned in 8 years that crying changes nothing. They just watched, and remembered. The Institute for Colored Youth sat on Lombard Street in Philadelphia, in a neighborhood that had been home to free black people for generations. The school was a 3-story brick building, once a warehouse, now filled with donated desks and shelves of books collected over decades. When Elijah and Ruth arrived in December 1862, the school had about 120 students, ages 6 to 22. Most were children of free black families who'd lived in Philadelphia for years. A few were escaped slaves who'd made their way north through the Underground Railroad. All were there for the same reason: to get an education the white world didn't want them to have. The principal was Ebenezer Bassett. He was 38, a graduate of Connecticut State Normal School, and one of the first black Americans to earn a college education. He'd led the institute since 1857, turning it into one of the best educational institutions for black students in the country. When Mr. Bassett first met the twins, he did what Dr. Warren had done. He tested them. But his tests were different. He didn't care about calculations or memory tricks. He wanted to understand. He sat with them in his office and asked questions, not math, not reading, but questions about the world. "Why do you think there's a war in this country?" he asked. Elijah and Ruth looked at each other. Over the years, they'd learned to communicate without words. A glance could carry whole conversations. Ruth answered first. "Because people believe things that aren't true. They believe some people are worth more than others. They believe skin color tells you something about the mind. They believe these things because it makes it easier to do terrible things without feeling guilty." She paused. "The war is about slavery. But slavery is about belief. If people stopped believing black people were inferior, slavery couldn't exist. The war is really about what people believe. Mr. Bassett sat back. He'd been teaching for nearly a decade. He'd met many intelligent students. But he'd never heard an 8-year-old speak with such clarity. "And you, Elijah?" he asked. Elijah considered the question carefully. "I think my sister's right. But there's something else. I think the war is also about money. People who own slaves are rich because they don't have to pay for labor. If slavery ends, they lose their money, and people will do almost anything to keep their money." He looked at Mr. Bassett with those intense dark eyes. "The war won't end until one side has no money left to fight. And many, many people will die before that happens." Mr. Bassett nodded slowly. Now he understood why Dr. Warren had been so astonished. These children didn't just have powerful minds, they had powerful understanding. They saw the world with a clarity most adults never achieved. But he also understood something Dr. Warren hadn't: these children were in danger. Their intelligence made them valuable to people who wanted to use them. And threatening to people who wanted to keep things as they were. They'd be sought after and despised. Celebrated and hunted. They'd never be allowed to just live in peace. Mr. Bassett made a decision in that moment. He would protect these children. He would educate them. He would prepare them for the world they'd face. And he would teach them something no one else could: how to survive. The years at the Institute were transformative. The twins studied math with Octavius Catto, a young black man who'd later become a leading civil rights activist in Philadelphia. They studied literature with Fannie Jackson, who would eventually become the first black woman to lead an institution of higher education in America. They studied science, history, languages, and philosophy with some of the finest black educators of their generation. But more importantly, they learned to control their gifts. Mr. Bassett understood that raw intelligence without wisdom could be dangerous. He'd seen bright young black men and women destroyed by white jealousy, their talents making them targets, not assets. Elijah and Ruth needed more than intellect. They needed judgment. Restraint. The wisdom to know when to show their abilities and when to hide them. "Your minds are like weapons," he told them one evening in his office. "A weapon always visible invites attack. A weapon hidden can be used when the time is right." He leaned forward. "There will be times you must show what you can do. When powerful people need to see your abilities. But there will also be times when showing them only brings harm. You must learn the difference." The twins listened carefully. They already understood, from their own experience. They'd seen how their intelligence destroyed their mother's life in Marblehead. They'd seen how white people reacted when confronted with black minds that exceeded their own. They practiced hiding in plain sight. They learned to give answers that were correct, but not too correct. To display knowledge that was impressive, but not threatening. To read white people's reactions and adjust accordingly. It was exhausting. It was degrading. It was necessary. Meanwhile, the war went on. In January 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring all slaves in Confederate states free. The news spread through Philadelphia's black community like wildfire. People celebrated in the streets. Churches held Thanksgiving services. For the first time, the federal government had declared slavery wrong. But the celebration was tempered. The proclamation only freed slaves in states in rebellion, not in border states that stayed in the Union. It didn't grant citizenship. It didn't give black people the vote. And it didn't end the war. Fighting continued through 1863 and into 1864. Battles grew larger and more terrible: Gettysburg, Vicksburg, Chickamauga. The names became synonymous with death on a scale America had never seen. Elijah followed the war obsessively. He collected newspapers and drew maps tracking armies. He calculated casualties and supply logistics. He predicted battle outcomes from available information, and his predictions were remarkably accurate. In March 1864, when he was 10, he wrote a letter to Colonel Robert Gould Shaw, commander of the famous 54th Massachusetts Infantry, one of the first black regiments in the Union Army. But Colonel Shaw had been killed at Fort Wagner in July 1863, and Elijah didn't know it. The letter was returned with a note explaining Shaw was dead. But someone had read it first, and was impressed enough to share it. The letter contained Elijah's analysis of the war. He argued the Union would win, but only with specific strategies: cut Confederate supply lines, use black soldiers more extensively for their motivation, and expect the war to end sometime in 1865. The letter eventually reached a Boston newspaper editor who'd known Shaw. He published it under the headline, "A Child's Wisdom on the War." The article noted it was written by a 10-year-old black boy at the Institute for Colored Youth in Philadelphia. Once again, the Carter twins were in the newspapers. And once again, trouble followed. In April 1864, a group of white men came to the Institute. 5 of them. Expensive suits, Southern accents. They said they were businessmen from Maryland, a border state where slavery was still legal. They'd heard about the remarkable Negro children and wanted to see them. Mr. Bassett met them at the door. He didn't like what he saw. These men had the look of slave catchers, men who hunted escaped slaves and returned them to bondage. "The children you're asking about aren't escaped slaves," Mr. Bassett said. "They were born free in Massachusetts. They're here legally, under my protection, with full support of this institution." The leader, a tall man with a gray beard and cold eyes, smiled without warmth. "We're not suggesting otherwise. We simply wish to meet them. Surely a brief visit would cause no harm." Mr. Bassett stood firm. "The children aren't available for visits. They're students here. Their education is my responsibility, and I don't believe your interest is academic." The men exchanged glances. Something passed between them, a silent communication Mr. Bassett didn't like. "Very well," the leader said. "Perhaps we'll return another time." They left. But Mr. Bassett knew they'd be back. That night, he called Elijah and Ruth to his office. "Do you know who those men were?" The twins looked at each other. Ruth spoke first. "They weren't businessmen. They were looking at us the way buyers look at merchandise. They want something specific." Elijah nodded. "They were lying about being from Maryland. Their accents were wrong. One slipped and used a phrase common in South Carolina, not Maryland. I think they're from further south." Mr. Bassett wasn't surprised. He'd learned to trust their perceptions. "I think they may try to take you," he said. "I don't know for certain. But I believe they see you as valuable property. Children with minds like yours would be worth a lot to certain people. Scientists wanting to study you. Circus owners wanting to display you. Or worse." He paused, letting the weight settle. "I'm sending you somewhere safe. There's a community in Ohio, near a town called Oberlin. It's an abolitionist stronghold. The college there has admitted black students for decades. There's a network protecting escaped slaves and free black people in danger. You'll be safe there." The twins didn't argue. They understood. Their minds, which should have been their greatest asset, had become a liability in a world not ready for black intelligence. 2 days later, they boarded a train heading west. They didn't know it yet, but they wouldn't return to Philadelphia for many years. They wouldn't see Mr. Bassett again. And the men in expensive suits wouldn't stop looking. The journey to Ohio took 4 days. The twins traveled with a woman named Harriet Tubman, not the Harriet Tubman, but a different woman using the same name, a common practice in the Freedom Network. Famous names provided cover and confusion, making it harder for slave catchers to track individuals. She was about 40, with strong hands and watchful eyes. She didn't speak much, just watched, listened, made sure no one followed. They traveled by train when safe, by wagon when not. They stayed in houses with certain signs in the windows, signs indicating safe harbor for black travelers. They ate meals prepared by strangers who asked no questions and expected no thanks. On the 3rd night, in a farmhouse in western Pennsylvania, the woman called Harriet sat down with them. "You're being hunted," she said. "Not just by those men from your school. There are others. People who've heard about your abilities. People who want to use you." She looked at them with eyes that had seen too much. "Some want to study you. They think your minds can teach them about race and intelligence. They want to cut you open and look at your brains. Measure your skulls, weigh your organs. They don't see you as children, they see you as specimens." Ruth felt a chill. She'd known people looked at her differently. She hadn't known some wanted to dissect her. "Others want to display you," Harriet continued. Put you on stages, charge money to see the Negro children who can think. Dress you up, teach you tricks, parade you like trained animals. Make themselves rich. Elijah clenched his fists. He'd always known his mind was different. He hadn't known it could be bought and sold like cotton. And there are some, Harriet said, her voice dropping, who want to destroy you. They believe your existence threatens everything they hold dear. If people see what you can do, if they believe black minds can equal white minds, the whole system of slavery and segregation collapses. They'd rather see you dead than prove them wrong. She leaned forward and took their hands. This is the world you live in. This is the world you'll have to survive. I'm sorry. I wish I could tell you it'll get better, but I can't promise that. All I can promise is there are people who will help you. People who believe in freedom. People who'll fight for you even when you can't fight for yourselves. She released their hands and stood. Tomorrow we reach Ohio. You'll be safe there. But remember what I've told you. Never forget you're hunted, and never stop running. The twins didn't sleep that night. They lay in their beds, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything Harriet said. About their mother, alone in Marblehead, not knowing where they were. About Mr. Bassett, who'd protected them and then sent them away to protect them further. About the men in suits who wanted to take them. About the future, long, uncertain, dangerous, stretching before them like an uncharted road. They were 10 years old. They'd already lived through more than most people experience in a lifetime. And they understood, in a way no child should, that their lives would never be easy. Their gifts would never be fully appreciated. Their minds would always be seen as anomalies. Exceptions. Impossibilities. But they also understood something else, they had each other. Born together, grown together, developed their extraordinary abilities together. Their minds worked differently when they were together than apart. They could communicate without words. Solve problems by splitting them between two perspectives. Protect each other in ways no one else could. This was their secret. Not their intelligence, not their memory, not their ability to calculate or read or understand. Their secret was their bond. And as long as they had that, they would survive.